Did you marry me for this heart? I covered my heart with my hand, tears in my eyes as I questioned James, the wealthy and handsome man who had pursued me for a whole year. That's right. It's indeed for this heart, Alice's heart. Alice was his first love who passed away in a car accident 2 years ago, and she is also my heart donor. James, let's get a divorce. James looked up in surprise, seemingly unable to believe that the word divorce had come out of my mouth. His expression returned to an indifferent look, as if he hadn't taken my words to heart. But this time, I'm serious. I really want to leave. When I first married into the James family, I was worried that Mrs. Evans would look down on me. After all, there was a significant economic gap between our two families. However, when she saw James holding my hand tightly, all she showed in her eyes was gratification and joy, and she also thanked me. At that time, I had no idea that I was actually a well-known substitute for everyone. I tasted a pot of nourishing soup and happily headed to the office. Recently, James has been working overtime all the time and has lost so much weight that he barely looks human. I need to make sure he gets some proper nourishment. The office door was slightly ajar, and just as I was about to knock, I suddenly heard Sarah's voice. James, it's been 5 years since Alice passed away. What's the point of keeping a vase with her heart at home? Alice, my heart donor, my savior. Sarah, I'll say it again. She's not dead. Her heart. I found it hard to believe and took a few steps back, almost dropping the thermos in my hand. I no longer have the courage to keep listening. I put down the thermos and hurriedly left, feeling as if I had shattered a beautiful dream. I called Mike, James's friend, and as soon as he picked up, I asked, "Who is Alice?" Mike seems to be at the bar, where the background noise is quite loud and it takes a while to quiet down a bit. In the summer, Alice was James's first love, but she later died in a car accident. I took a deep breath, trying hard to suppress my sobs. She is also my lifesaver, the one who donated her heart to me, Alice, right? Mike was silent for a long time. When he finally tried to explain, I interrupted him with the "I know." I felt a tightness in my chest, a chaos that was almost unbearable, as if I had stolen the life that rightfully belonged to Alice. What hurts me even more is that the marriage and wonderful life I once took pride in turned out to be a complete deception. I am merely a substitute, as Sarah said. I am just a vessel that holds a living heart. James returned home very late, his voice somewhat hoarse but still gentle. "Honey, why are you still awake so late? Didn't I say you don't have to wait for me?" He said that nothing is more important than his wife getting her beauty sleep. I sat on the sofa, looking up at him. "James, are you calling me your Alice? You are looking at her through me, right?" I asked. "You know her heart is with me, which is why she desperately pursues me, confessing her feelings repeatedly and persistently, while I foolishly believe I have found true love." James smiled gently, his body completely relaxed as he leaned back on the sofa. Despite the slight fatigue on his face, it does not diminish his charm. Instead, it enhances a kind of melancholic beauty. "Yes, Summer, you are absolutely right. I would never fall in love with you. Alice and I grew up together. We got engaged when we were 18, just waiting for the legal age to get married. However, she passed away in a car accident and could not wait for that wedding, and I must fulfill this promise to her." Tears flowed uncontrollably, and it felt as though a gigantic, merciless hand tightly gripped my heart, rendering me unbearable agony. I covered my heart with my hand and asked tearfully, "Did you marry me just for this heart?" James was no longer willing to hide his indifference, and his expression became distant. "Yes, it's just for this heart. Alice's heart. The only one I love in my heart is Alice. Summer, you will always be just a substitute for her." James's words flowed like a burst dam, revealing the emotions he had long suppressed deep within. He no longer wanted to pretend, since I had already noticed he might as well be straightforward. I sneered, mocking my own foolishness, laughing at how I had been treated like a toy for the past 3 years. "James, let's get a divorce." James has always been decisive in his work, but he seems unusually slow when it comes to the divorce. The reason is obvious: he wants to keep me. In other words, he wanted that heart to feel its beating and vitality, but I don't want to stay. I am Summer, unwilling to compromise. I was packing my luggage when Sarah calmly walked into the house in her heels. "Oh, you're leaving?" I have never liked Sarah, although she hasn't done anything particularly wrong. Whenever I see her, I always feel uncomfortable and uneasy. Sarah looked me up and started joking. Upon closer inspection, Summer and Alice do look very alike, with similar appearances and styles. But I prefer Summer more. She leaned closer to me, and the strong scent of her perfume hit me, forcing me to step back to paces. Summer is more understanding and more reasonable. I covered my nose and retorted, "Sarah, is your perfume so strong to mask your bad breath? Moreover, my decision to stay or leave is none of your business. You don't need to presume to judge it, especially since Alice doesn't need it either." Sarah clapped her hands to herself, her eyes filled with sarcasm. "That's right. You don't have children, so you can leave easily." I have to thank James. If it weren't for him asking me to send you the health soup with added contraceptive pills, you would have had a child by now. This sentence hit me like a bolt of lightning, leaving me speechless. Sarah left triumphantly, while I remained rooted to the spot, unable to come to my senses for a long time. Contraceptives and health preservation soup. I always thought that James cared about my health and encouraged me to drink health soup. Looking back now, it really is extremely ridiculous. When he pursued me, wanted to marry me, and said he loved me, he didn't feel a shred of guilt in his heart. I am even more convinced that he has never truly loved me. I have had a weak heart since childhood, but my parents never gave up on me and have stayed by my side in the hospital year after year. 5 years ago, at that moment, I had just spent my 20th birthday in the hospital silently making a wish for a chance to live. 3 days later, I finally found a suitable heart and successfully underwent the transplant surgery. The new heart beats strongly within me, and I can feel its vitality. My family members have radiant smiles of happiness on their faces. I learned that the girl who donated her heart to me is named Alice. She was 2 years older than me, and sadly passed away due to a car accident. She is a medical student who understands that organ donation can save 5 or 6 lives. Therefore, she has already signed an organ donation agreement and is determined and not to let anyone change their mind. I remembered her name and went to the temple to pray for her and light incense after I was discharged from the hospital, and will always cherish Alice, who was as important to my life as a savior. Not long after I had this heart, James suddenly entered my life. At that time, I still appeared youthful, while James was already the owner of a company, accomplished, handsome, and wealthy. Through a friend's introduction, I successfully interviewed and joined this company. At first, James would guide me in my work, bring me breakfast, and treat me to coffee. Later, he started giving necklaces, flowers, and clothes, until I finally asked him in disbelief, "Boss, are you pursuing me?" James raised an eyebrow in surprise and responded with a hint of amusement. "Isn't it obvious? I know in my heart that I've always had bad luck and often face health issues, so I naturally don't believe in things like pie falling from the sky. Therefore, I think James has just grown tired of heavy meals and wants to try some light, gruel, and simple dishes. But he won't stick to it for long." However, what he didn't expect was that he actually persevered for a whole year. On the first New Year with my healthy heart, my family gathered together, filled with joy and laughter. Just as the clock struck midnight, James's call came in. "Happy New Year, Summer," he said gently. "Happy New Year, James," I responded. "I am downstairs at your place." His voice came through, and I was surprised and excited, quickly running to the window to take a look. Although James's face appeared somewhat blurry in the snow, his good looks could not be concealed. The more I look at her nose and eyes, the more I like them. On the other end of the phone, James's voice was deep and pleasant, full of sincerity. "Summer, be my girlfriend." But all of this feels like a romantic idol drama. A year later, at the age of 22, I naturally entered the hall of marriage with James. That day, my friends were so excited that they drank quite a bit. They grabbed my hand and said, "Summer, you should thank me. If I hadn't agreed to James' request to introduce you to his company, would you two hurt such a fate today?" A buzzing sound filled my mind, and I failed to absorb many of the words she said afterward. Graham never liked hiding things, so that night I went to ask James what was going on. James is good at lying. He created a more romantic story to deceive me. What is love at first sight? And what is meant by needing only you? It's just an excuse for him to desire my heart. He no longer wants to make up lies to deceive me, and I also want to escape from all this falsehood. I am Summer. I am not an object, and I am certainly not a substitute. A prompt voice pulled me back to reality, and I hurriedly lifted my suitcase. I slightly lifted my toes, but it still wasn't enough. A hurried voice of urging came from behind. I thought to just grab the suitcase first, and at that moment, a pair of strong hands easily placed it on top. I turned around and said thank you, and saw a boy wearing a baseball cap. His jawline was well defined, and he was quite tall, probably around 9 meters. His voice was as clear as cold jade, a rare quality. He was not polite. It wasn't until we got off the train that I realized we were getting off at the same station. Not only that, but we also took the same car and got off at the same neighborhood. I quickened my pace, and the horrific cases involuntarily surfaced in my mind. I couldn't let my guard down just because he was good-looking. I reached into my bag and felt the pepper spray, which made me feel a little more at ease. As long as he dares to come near, I will make sure he regrets it. The footsteps behind me suddenly quickened, and my heart tightened. I immediately took out my pepper spray and shouted loudly, "Ha! Don't come over here." After a while, there was still no movement around. I just noticed that Mrs. Liu next door and that boy were both looking at me, their gazes filled with complex emotions. "Summer, what are you doing?" The boy standing next to Mrs. Liu smiled slightly, nodded at me, and finally spoke. "Summer, long time no see." At that moment, I remembered he was Mrs. Liu's son, Lucas. He used to be completely different from how he is now, making it hard for me to recognize him. I remember back then he was a big, chubby guy, while I was a little skinny girl. We were often teased as the fat and thin fairy children. My mom was busy chatting, her face beaming with joy. Lucas has grown up, but he looks really handsome. Mrs. Liu also held my hand, smiling and praising me, saying, "Summer is getting more and more beautiful. If you weren't already married, I would really like to introduce you to my family's Lucas." My parents were laughing happily, but I felt uneasy inside, not knowing how to tell them that I wanted a divorce. The chat history with James on my phone is stuck on the message where I urged him to get a divorce quickly. He hasn't replied, which shows that he doesn't care. I don't care either. He has his life, and I have mine. I told my parents that I don't plan to go back for now, and would like to stay at home for a while. I came up with an excuse to get by. They just told me not to be petty and to speak up when something happens. I quietly nodded. The days spent at home were really boring, so with nothing to do, I get up early to go for a morning run. Actually, it's because of insomnia. I can't fall asleep. Memories of my moments with James constantly linger in my mind, making it hard to let go. We were once so sweet together, and I thought he loved me deeply. I devoted all my heart to him. Later, I found out that all of this was a scam. He had already set a trap, waiting for me to take the bait. Even if I escape back home, how can I forget? How could I forget? I go for a morning run every day. At first, I was alone, but later I often ran into Lucas, although it felt a bit awkward after not seeing each other for years. Lucas seemed unfazed. His behavior makes me feel that we are still good friends, and I can confide in him. Gradually, we talk a lot. I said I wanted to open a flower shop and simply accompany my parents in life. Lucas smiled brightly and responded earnestly. "Then I will invest in you and apply to become the second largest shareholder of the flower shop." I smiled and agreed, but felt a hint of unease in my heart. At that moment, a deep and familiar voice came from beside me. When it comes to investing, this is definitely my strength. When I saw James suddenly appear, surprise and embarrassment intertwined in my heart. Lucas glanced at James and turned to ask me, "Is he your husband?" James suppressed his anger, fixing his gaze on Lucas, speaking clearly with each word, "or else." I wiped the sweat off my forehead and replied to Lucas, "My ex-husband." Lucas smiled gently, reminding me to return early, and then left me and James alone. "Who is he?" James stood up and closed the distance between us. He had obvious bruises on his face, suggesting he had rushed over overnight and appeared somewhat fatigued. Friend. James was clearly unhappy with my answer and retorted with a hint of resentment. What friends? Boyfriend? Summer, why are you leaving so soon? Is it because you have found someone new? His last words really angered me, so I raised my hand and slapped him. The applause was loud, leaving James a bit incredulous. James, don't use your dirty thoughts to judge me. I'm different from you. I went on to say that I hope you can sign the divorce agreement as soon as possible, so that we can avoid unnecessary entanglements. After I slapped him, James's tone became even more abrasive. Summer, I don't want a divorce. Don't forget, Alice's heart is still in your hands. His words are simply shameless. That's right, Alice's heart is in my body, but that's not a reason for you to threaten me to stay. I said with no hesitation, this is Alice's heart, the organ-donation agreement she signed with her own hands, and it is the hope she left for the patients, not your private property. Alice has her own independent personality and aspirations. By doing this, you are tarnishing hers. Every word I say is powerful and resonates with the cries of my heart. I extended my index finger and emphatically pointed at James's heart, saying mercilessly, and your so-called health soup actually contains contraceptives, doesn't it? James, my health has never been good. Did you not hesitate at all when you decided to drug me? Or rather, you don't see me as a human at all. I don't want to think about the past or dwell on it. I just hope you return to your own place immediately. I thought James would understand, but unexpectedly the next day, he and Lucas both showed up at my door. Lucas shrugged, his eyes full of disdain that he couldn't hide at all. Someone is like a stubborn piece of candy, insisting on following me. What a brazen move. James coughed twice slightly with his fist, as if he wanted to explain that he was just accompanying me for a morning jog. What's wrong with that? But he insisted on following me, and I was left with no choice but to let James act recklessly. No matter where I went along the way, James stuck close to me, almost clingy to the extreme. In the end, I could no longer tolerate it, so I simply went home. James followed me all the way to my front door and wouldn't leave until I went inside. Aren't you leaving yet? I asked. James smiled innocently and greeted someone behind me. My mom happily welcomed him in, completely oblivious to the gloom on my face. At that moment, James leaned in close to my ear and whispered, "We haven't gotten divorced yet, and it was Summer's parents who let me in." The meal was particularly tense, with my parents constantly asking questions, while James handled it with ease. I felt suffocated, caught in the middle. Why does he come to entangle me again? Was it really that difficult to cut ties completely? He truly exhausted all kinds of means for this heart. When his parents mentioned having a baby, James's expression changed immediately, and he stopped talking. He truly had nothing to say. How could he possibly speak? Can he say that it's to commemorate his first love and give me birth control pills? He clearly knows that my health is not good, yet he chooses to ignore it. At that moment, James ran after her, unable to accept the reality of the divorce. His self-esteem and pride do not allow him to be abandoned. He believes he should be the revered excellent one. But why should I support him? In my eyes, he is worthless now. In the following week, every time I went out, I could see James and Lucas outside the door. The two glared at each other, as if they would love to kick the other one out. At the dining table again, James said he would go back to the company tomorrow to handle some matters, and his parents urged him to go ahead and take care of it. After James left, I made an excuse to spend more time with my parents and stayed at home. Lucas handed me a bottle of water, his eyes showing some concern. "What's wrong? You look distracted," he asked. "It's okay, maybe I just didn't get enough rest last night," I replied, trying to sound casual. Lucas nodded, hesitated for a moment, and then spoke up. "Summer, do you still like him?" I took a big sip of water, sighed deeply, and pretended to be casual as I said, "No, I just need some time to adjust. After all, we have been together for 4 years, and many things take time to forget." Lucas's eyes sparkled with light, his lips slightly curled in a smile, and his voice was gentle and clear. "Let's go to the flower shop, Summer." At that moment, the morning sun shone down on Lucas and me. He didn't say anything comforting. He just smiled at me and said, "Open a flower shop, Summer." This sentence seems to remind me not to dwell on the past, but to embrace the new life ahead. I hurried home excitedly, eager to tell my parents about my plan to open a flower shop here and start a new life. At that moment, an ambulance drove past me, and my heart raced uncontrollably. I quit in my pace, and the scene before me tight and my heart. Dad was being lifted onto the ambulance. I hurried to my mother's side and tightly embraced her body as it was about to collapse. At this moment, Sarah stood in front of me, looking down at me. Summer, how could you keep such a big thing like divorce from uncle and aunt? If it weren't for my arrival, how long were you planning to keep it hidden? She tossed out this line and, wearing high heels, turned around and walked away. However, after walking for a short distance, she turned back, squatted down, and whispered to me, "Do you really think you are too? It's just a longing for that heart. I finally waited for this opportunity, so please don't let me down." I stood by the bedside and a heavy burden in my heart finally eased. Mom's eyes were red and swollen from crying as she tightly grasped my hand and eagerly asked, "Summer, tell me, did you get divorced from James?" I nodded and replied firmly, "Yes. Mom, I want to get a divorce from him." As I spoke, a wave of bitterness surged within me. I pouted and threw myself into my mother's arms, crying out, "Mom, James never truly loved me. He only loved my heart, the heart of his first love." I am filled with confusion. What does that make me? Is it a substitute? I continued. I regret it so much. I regret marrying James, and it ended up causing Dad to get sick. Hearing my words, my mother also burst into tears, gently patting my shoulder. Her voice was soft as she said, "Mommy understands, sweetheart, and I don't blame you." I wept, gasping for breath through my sobs. At that moment, I heard my dad's strained voice behind me. I was both startled and delighted, and tears flowed uncontrollably down my face. I finally breathed a sigh of relief. Dad is okay now. Dad is recovering well and just needs to stay in the hospital for a few more days. Lucas was busy around me, and he took extra care to look after my feelings. James never seemed to be like this. He gave me a love that was materialistic and mundane, with sweet nothings that felt like they were copied and pasted. Yet I found myself deeply enmeshed in it. I have always believed that I can't have children because of my poor health. But looking at it now, it seems that all of this was arranged by James. As he said, I am merely a substitute and am not worthy of having children at all. What I once thought was sincerity turned out to be nothing but fade. Now he has returned, standing in front of me, holding expensive flowers and jewelry. "Summer, come back with me," he said softly. "After this period of time, I've come to realize that I like you." He continued speaking, his eyes full of anticipation. "When I saw you with Lucas, you were so radiant, and in that moment, I realized that I seemed to have fallen in love with you. Summer, please forgive me." I gazed at James quietly, my eyes revealing no emotion, and coldly replied, "All right, I'll go back with you." When James got out of the car, Sarah was laughing particularly joyfully. However, when she saw James go around to the other side to open the car, her face turned pale with anger. I waved at her with a slight smile and said, "Sarah, long time no see." Although she gritted her teeth, she still respectfully reached out to help me carry the bag. "Mrs. Evans, welcome home." I handed the bag to her, but suddenly turned around and gave it to James instead. "There are some important things inside. Could you please help me get them?" James chuckled and joked, "Of course, I have to pick up my wife's bag myself." To spend more time with me, James left some of his work to handle at home, which significantly increased my chances of seeing Sarah. She showed her love for James without any concealment. The emotions revealed in her gaze were truly raw and unfiltered. I can't believe that James didn't notice, yet he still kept her around. It's truly laughable. "Sarah, please make me a cup of coffee." "Sarah, bring me that book." "Sarah, please get me the toner." With James around, Sarah couldn't act out and had to comply one by one. When she handed me the toner, her eyes were filled with sorrow. As she loosened her grip, the toner slipped from her hand, shattering on the ground with a loud crash. The liquid splattered onto my pants, creating a complete mess. Sarah smiled at me slightly and bowed gently, saying, "I'm sorry. I accidentally broke it." I sat there, looking up at her, with the corners of my mouth slightly turned up. "It's okay. Just pay the compensation. Don't forget, this bottle of wine is worth half a month's salary for you, so remember to pay me back." Sarah's expression suddenly became stiff as I walked past her, giving a slight smile. "Sarah, I'm causing you trouble because you absolutely shouldn't involve my parents. Your good days are still ahead of you." I patted her shoulder, lifted my chin, and wore a hint of sarcasm. "If you've caused the trouble yourself, don't expect your Ed to help you clean it up." When Sarah left, her face was pale, and she seemed obviously nervous. I couldn't help but laugh out loud as James leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and teased. "It seems like you had a great conversation with Sarah." I agreed with James and advanced to sleep separately. I came back not for him, but for Sarah. I called Lucas and we talked for a long time. When I hung up the phone, I realized my hands were trembling. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. After applying the lipstick, I glanced at myself in the mirror and felt as if I could see Alice too. She cast a determined glance at me from behind and nodded slightly. Sarah arrived late, with a trace of resentment on her face. "What is it that you want this time?" I asked. I tossed out a stack of photos, all featuring James, work-related events, drinking, social gatherings, everything is included. Sarah's expression changed instantly, and her voice rose a few notches. "How did you get this?" I held up a photo and shook it in front of her. "Think about it. If James knew that you were secretly recording his every move like a voyeur, would you still dare to stay by his side?" Sarah seemed a bit flustered and hurriedly retorted, "You're talking nonsense. These are not the photos I took." I raised my hand to signal her to stop. "Sarah, why do you have to struggle? If James wants to check, can he not find out? He merely regards you as a pursuer and an assistant to satisfy his vanity and work requirement. Didn't he notice your intense affection for him at all? He has it, but he doesn't care. He enjoys being in a state where someone is infatuated with him, so he chooses to play dumb." I continued, but they didn't expect that this kind of indulgence would ultimately harm his first love, the one he cherished the most. Hearing this, Sarah's face instantly turned pale. She rushed to my side and angrily questioned, "What do you really know?" I looked her in the eyes and slowly said every word. "It's you who killed Alice." Every word felt like a death knell, and Sarah's gaze became distorted. I know in my heart that I only tampered a little with her car. I never intended for her to die. In a coma with severe injuries, I really didn't expect her to die. I was seething with anger, almost shouting, "But she is dead. Sarah, in the face of life, no reason can be an excuse. You are committing murder." Sarah's eyes reflected a sickly madness as she burst into laughter, grabbing my collar. "Yes, I killed someone. So what? That kind of cheap woman, Alice, is just pretending to be innocent. I can't stand her being with James, so I want her dead. I didn't expect my plan would end up making her a wedding gown for someone else. Otherwise, with someone like you, do you even deserve to marry into the Evans family and stand by James's side?" I suddenly grabbed Sarah's hand and turned around to slap her. She was stunned, covering her swollen cheek. I approached her step by step and slapped her again. "Sarah, don't think that I will treat you the same way Alice does. You cannot bully me, and you are not qualified to bully her. You used those little tricks on Alice before, right? But she is kind and doesn't want to hold it against you, yet she ended up suffering terribly because of you. She left this heart to me, and now I am going to personally send you to prison. I want you to regret causing Alice's death for the rest of your life, living forever in the shadow of me and her." Sarah was furious, shouting as she searched for something to hurt me. But it was all too late. The police burst in and arrested her. Lucas smiled gently at me and walked briskly towards me. Sarah struggled desperately, shouted loudly, and spat at me. Let go of me. Let go of me. I want to kill her. Damn it, you contemptible woman. Even if I become a ghost, I won't let you off. I not only killed Alice, but I will also kill you. What did you say?" James arrived just in time and was standing at the door, hearing Sarah's words. Sarah suddenly deflated and pleaded with the police to take her away quickly. James refused to let her go and followed her to the police station. When James returned home, I had already packed my bags and was ready to leave. He seemed to have aged several years in an instant, clearly worn out. I handed him the divorce agreement again. Sign here. James remained silent and unwilling to pick up the pen. James, do you really not know how Sarah feels about you? Did you not notice her passionate and bold love at all? You know the truth in your heart, yet you still let her stay by your side. You believe that being pursued and liked by others can make you more attractive, which satisfies your vanity. Didn't you say you love Liz very much? But isn't it self-deception for you to pursue me, fall in love with me, and marry me in the name of your heart? You could have spent the rest of your life by Alice's grave, but you didn't. Thinking it was true love, you ended up hurting 3 women. Nowadays, I hope we can part ways peacefully without making a big scene. James finally signed his name on the agreement, and I picked up the document, ready to leave. I'm sorry. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse, like a rusty tin box. I accept your apology, but I will not forgive you. I started walking, leaving without looking back. I told my parents about what happened, and they understood and supported me. After returning to my hometown, I opened the flower shop I had always dreamed of. Lucas often comes to the store to help out and has become the store's attractive figure. A year and a half passed like this, and my parents occasionally urged me to remarry, but I always declined. It is always difficult to walk out after experiencing pain. In love, I have become more sensitive and vulnerable, with my temper fluctuating between good and bad. I'm not sure if I can find someone who deeply loves me and can accept all of me. Instead, I feel that being single is better. Mrs. Liu and my mom also want to match me with Lucas, but I feel that I'm really not worthy of him. Ms. Li has treated me so well, so I naturally don't want to repay her kindness in a material way. The second hand ticks away, second by second. The door is about to close. Lucas walked in. He wanted to buy flowers. I want white hyacinths and red roses. The white hyacinth symbolizes unrequited love, while the red rose represents passionate and genuine love. It seems that Lucas is ready to confess his feelings to someone he has had a crush on for a long time. No wonder he doesn't want to get married or go blind dating. It turns out he already has a goal. While wrapping flowers for him, I couldn't help but feel a mix of complex emotions. But I quickly felt guilty and realized I should be happy for him instead. I handed the flower to Lucas, teasing him. Rest assured, with Master Sir's Riffmaster personally overseeing it, it will definitely succeed. Lucas chuckled and asked in return, Is that so? What about you? I was momentarily stunned. Lucas had already taken the bouquet and was holding it with both hands. I like you, Summer. This scene, dreamlike and surreal, reappears, and I find myself somewhat dazed. 10 years. I waited for a full decade. In the past 2 years, we were waiting for us to grow up, but then you went abroad, and gradually we lost contact. Mom told me that you were better now, and I am happy for you. But later, when you started a relationship, I thought to myself that as long as you weren't married, I still had a chance. But later, when you really got, after returning to my country, I wandered around, trying to forget you, but on a high-speed train back to my hometown I saw you again. In that moment, I realized that I would never be able to forget you. After learning about your divorce, I slowly approached you, hoping to make up for the regret of not being by your side during those years. Summer, my love may be subtle and elusive, but today, I want it to be open and unmistakable. Lucas's voice trembled, and my eyes brimmed with tears. I think I have found the person who loves me deeply. On the day Lucas and I got married, everyone was very happy. I no longer worry about being unworthy of him, because Lucas has given me enough confidence. He always tells me that I'm great and that I'm the person he thinks about all the time. Dad handed my hand to Lucas, and he held it tightly. I could sense his nervousness. The cheers from the audience surged like a tide, and I saw James standing in the distance. Since I left, he hasn't come to find me again. But it seems that he has been here many times. He orders a bouquet of yellow roses every day, but he has never come to pick them up in person. The yellow rose symbolizes an apology. I understand his intention, but what does it really mean? The harm he has caused me is irreparable. There was a time when I was deeply mired in self-pity, unable to accept this reality. At that time, he was indifferent to me and showed no concern whatsoever. Late-arriving emotions are as cheap and meaningless as grass. He seemed to have witnessed the entire process. Seeing that I had no intention of speaking with him, he quietly left. His figure appeared somewhat lonely, but that no longer concerned me. Lucas gently held my hand, his eyes sparkling with brilliance. Summer, let the past drift away with the wind. From now on, I will walk with you every step of the way, every day. I stood on my tiptoes and kissed Lucas's lips gently. Good. Every day.